Hello and good evening, everybody. This is Amanda. I'm doing my presentation on the prepositions to versus at. So preposition cat and I will take you through the presentation now. As you can see from this comic strip, even native speakers can have a hard time with both written and spoken English. So it should come as no surprise that English learners find certain aspects of the language to be quite challenging. If you're not familiar with Cyanide and Happiness cartoons, they're pretty funny, and you can just Google them. But this is one of my favorites. So I chose to focus on prepositions because they're deceptively simple little words that trip up and confuse Ls, even Ls who are really advanced. The trouble with these words is that they seem illogical to many Ls because often their first languages use prepositions quite differently, or they don't use them at all, and I imagine that our prepositions seem quite cumbersome to them. According to the grammar book, some languages use inflections instead of prepositions. Other languages use prepositions, but they don't correspond directly to those in English. So they might use a single preposition to connote two different meanings, whereas we would need to use two different prepositions. For example, in Spanish, "on el agua" can mean both in or on the water. Other languages may use a preposition whose extended interpretation means something entirely different than the corresponding English preposition, such as the French use of "à," which is equivalent to our use of "to" when it is used in place of "for." So we say a glass for cognac, and they say un verre à cognac, which directly translated is a glass to cognac, which makes no sense in English. A prototypical North American bird is a robin, and it would be less common to say that a prototypical bird is a penguin. We think of a penguin much less frequently than a robin when we think of American birds. So prototypically, we think of prepositions as indicators of a concrete spatial relationship first and foremost. Then we get into polysemous meanings, which are extensions beyond the core meaning, and they grow more and more abstract as they move away from the core. So this is probably the most challenging aspect of learning prepositions for English language learners. Locating an object in space involves two or more entities. For example, meet me at the corner. One entity, the trajector, is foregrounded, in this case, me. The other, the landmark, is backgrounded, in this case, the corner. The preposition establishes a relationship between the entities. In the case of the preposition at, it denotes a point of orientation. It's a little bit challenging to think of a three-dimensional object as a point in space, but if you think of it as looking at it from above, like Google Earth, it's easier to grasp. The trajector and the landmark occupy the same point in space. This is an example of the core spatial meaning of at. Then we get into the extended, abstracted meanings of at. First, we look at it as a point along a route, and then a point along a scale, such as at the first stop and at 20,000 feet. It's fairly easy to extend the meaning in this way because these landmarks can be thought of as metaphorical points along a line. When you think of a point of focus, such as look at the stars, or in the picture here, the baby is looking at the bird, the landmark is not just a point of orientation, but also a point of focus. And then, a bit more abstractly, we use it as a place for activity, a point of orientation that signifies some sort of activity, such as men at work, or I am at a competition. Moving along to to. In our book, to is defined as a spatial preposition represented by the trajector heading toward the landmark. The landmark is the trajector's goal. The statement reach to the right describes a literal trajector, such as your hand or arm, reaching out to the right to grasp something. Our book also notes the extended meanings of to. Think of them as concentric circles of meaning. As you get farther out, you are farther from the original meaning. For example, contact, apply soap to the stain. Attachment, add a fence to the garden. An event, he came to my rescue. In each of these three, the target is oriented toward and heading towards a landmark to achieve a goal. The last two are a little more abstract. Comparison. This one is inferior to that one. The book says that this may have developed because when comparing two things, we often move them closer together. And lastly, we have location. Diana is standing to my left. This one is slightly different because Diana may not necessarily be oriented toward the landmark. And we move to our discussion of prepositions in class. Way back in February in our first in-person meeting, we talked about prepositions. Echo opened with Pete Seeger singing English is Crazy, and in that song he noted the inconsistencies in our English language. Prepositions are mostly free morphemes. They come before nouns, hence preposition, easy way to remember it, and they're followed by a noun phrase. Sometimes they're made up of more than one word, as in the phrase because of, and sometimes they're an object to a verb. For example, the car is in the garage. We discussed the form, meaning, and use of prepositions, and to and at in particular, and we discussed at as the point of orientation and the extensions of meaning, and to as the landmark as the goal for the movement of the trajectory. We discussed a bit more about how it's used and went over what was in the book. So we come to the video that I chose to use for this presentation. Why did I choose this video? Well, I watched quite a few videos before choosing this one from YouTube. Some teachers tackle too many prepositions at once. They speak too quickly, or they mumble, or they clog up the lesson with too many asides and jokes. This teacher, Rebecca, keeps things simple and well organized. She uses a side-by-side visual to compare to and at. She enunciates well, and she speaks slowly enough that I think most L's would be able to understand her. She's friendly and she smiles, but she doesn't try to crack jokes that could confuse her students. So this is a pretty good, not beginner video, but someone who's not completely fluent yet could understand her. As you can see from the captured video image, she clearly lays out several ways we use both at and to. After the lesson, she gives a little quiz. So the lesson was about 4 minutes long, and then she gives a 10-question quiz, but it's really more of a review and a reinforcement. It takes up the second half of the lesson, and then after the review, students can visit the website for another quiz as well. So some video takeaways. The benefits are it's quick and simple comparison, and it will help clear up confusion on to and at. Rebecca helpfully notes that movement verbs are associated with to, and that's not really something they discussed in the book. And she uses her body and her body language to help convey that to is moving towards something and at is stationary. Although she uses a verb list in her chart and the discussion, she notes that it's less important to memorize the list than it is to understand how each preposition is used. There are a couple of drawbacks. The video doesn't get into too much detail on extended and abstract uses, and some of the examples are questionable to a native speaker. For example, fly could be used with to or fly at, like I fly to London, or the object came flying at my face, depending on the context. But she was keeping it simple and didn't want to confuse the viewer, obviously, and it's much more common to say I'm flying to somewhere than something is flying at me. So overall, I really found the video to be effective, and it's an effective lesson in how to use to and at without going into deep detail and philosophizing, like in our book. That's sort of a very, I think, teacherly way of looking at it rather than from a student's point of view, the way that our grammar book laid it out. So ELS may want to delve into that detail as they become more comfortable with the language, but I think as a starting place for someone who has some confusion about the basic uses of to and at, this is a great place to start. Okay, so thank you so much for listening and hope all is well with all of you, and I'll see you soon. Bye.